The idea for my homily comes from the very last lines of the reading we heard from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, where he says that you, Corinthians, are God's field, God's building. Metaphors that are appropriate both for an urban culture, saying to the church at Corinth, the community there, you're a building, God's building. Also appropriate for an agrarian economy, saying to the congregation in Corinth, you're a field, you're God's field. Maybe those analogies don't strike us as particularly appropriate. Building might, I don't know, maybe some of you do a little gardening. Talking about a field might strike a chord. Maybe we could simply think of another synonym. You are God's project. And I think that's a very important thing for us all to think about. It wasn't only the Christian community, the church in Corinth, that was God's project, but it is about all of us. We're all a project worked by God. What is the nature of that project? If somebody said to you, and most of you, many of you are in business and commerce, you're used to goals and objectives, I think. Somebody were to say to you, what's the goal? What are the objectives of the Christian life? What kind of a project is it? My suspicion is that the first word that might come to mind is holiness. It's a project about becoming holy. But I think we can make that even more concrete. The project of the Christian life is to become like Christ. The project of the Christian life is to grow in our adoption. In another place, St. Paul says, we are sons in the Son. We are sons and daughters in the Son. We are, by adoption, what Jesus is by nature. And I think sometimes we get stuck by imagining that the Christian life is a sort of ethical club that we belong to for the sake of advancement in ethics. The Christian life is a much higher reality. The object, the goal of the Christian life is to love with the love of Jesus Christ, so that what God the Father sees and loves in Jesus is what he will see and love in you. Not something simply like the love of Christ, like the goodness of Christ, like the self-offering and abandonment of self to God the Father, like Christ, but a participation in that itself. That's the project. That's the building. That's the field. Now, I hope you're not intimidated by that, because it isn't something that you and I have to accomplish on our own. We look at what happens in the gospel. Christ said he wasn't going to stay in Capernaum. He needed to be out in all of the towns of Judea to engage in his mission. And the mission of Christ is to build us up into God's adopted sons and daughters, to work in us, to accomplish this great task, these goals and objectives, which are beyond our ability by nature. No one can love the Father and love the world as Christ does, except Christ and those who are in Christ. All of that, I realize, is somewhat abstract. But it is important, I think, for your thanksgiving. That's really what's most important. I don't know if you ever notice, but every time you come to Mass, you say, it is right to give God thanks and praise. It is right and just. And the priest says, right and just always and everywhere. That's what's remarkable about the Christian faith. Always and everywhere, it is saving, it is salvation itself to give thanks. And tonight I would ask you particularly to offer God and be mindful of making thanksgiving for the fact that you aspire to be in the image and in the likeness of Christ. This is a great grace. I was thinking about this as I was preparing to come to be with you tonight. There are a lot of other places you could be. There are a lot of other people who aren't here. Look around. I suspect there's going to be more people at Comerica Park tonight than there will be at our program. But we don't fret about that. We give God thanks and praise for what He has already done. And just one more point. The great thing about being this project is that we're not just the object of God's action, but we get to be participants, agents of this project. It's Christ's work, but it's also my work, it's your work, this spending our life to become more like Christ. That's one of the ways He shows us respect. He makes us His partners. He makes us His co-workers in our own salvation. All the more something to give God thanks and praise for. Each of you comes to this celebration with a particular history, a background, some years of the way that grace has been unfolding in your life, the way you have felt called to be a faithful son, a faithful daughter in Christ Jesus. Each of you has something very special, very particular, very individual to give God thanks and praise for. But what's important especially is for each of us to give thanks for all of us, and all of us to give thanks for each of us. I ask you then, please, join me in my giving God thanks for how He has been at work in my life. And I'm honored to be part of your thanksgiving for what you know, how mysteriously and marvelously and generously God has led you to this point and is building you up into His field, into His building, into His project. Praise be Jesus Christ, now and forever.